Hello, hello. Welcome to English Extras. My name is Jean. If you're here, it's because you don't want to sound like a textbook. You're in the right place. This podcast is to help intermediate and advanced learners find alternatives to textbook English so you can express yourself authentically. Before we begin, if you want the transcript for this episode, you can follow the link in the description. Reading and listening at the same time is a great way to improve your English, and I also include definitions of words and phrases I use in the episode, as well as example sentences at the end of each transcript. Ready? Let's begin. It's not always the most comfortable thing to tell someone that they are being too loud. It feels confrontational to a lot of people. However, being able to communicate this in an appropriate way, depending on the situation, is an important skill. So, in this episode, I'm going to share with you phrases you can use to tell someone to be quiet in 3 different levels of formality. Let's start with formal or very polite phrases. It's a good idea to use one of these phrases in situations where you are talking to strangers. Let's say that you are at a movie theater. The movie hasn't started yet, but the previews are on. Someone nearby is being very loud. Maybe they have children or they are just chatting too loudly. It's difficult to hear what's going on. In this case, you don't want to be too aggressive, but you want to say something. Here are a few different things you can say. You can say, "Excuse me, please be quiet." Excuse me is always a great way to get someone's attention, especially if you don't know that person. Be quiet is a bit commanding, but the please makes it much softer. If you want to make this even softer, you can phrase it as a question. You can say, "Excuse me, could you please be quiet?" Adding "could you" to a request makes it less commanding and more polite. Let's keep the question format, but change the be quiet part. Instead of "could you please be quiet," we could also say, "Could you please lower your voice?" Or we could also say, "Could you please keep it down?" So lower your voice and keep it down are other phrases that also mean be quiet. You could also replace "could you" with "would you mind?" Now, grammatically, these are not interchangeable. If you want to use "would you mind," then the verb immediately after this phrase should be in the continuous form, the ing form, the ing form. Listen to the difference. "Could you lower your voice, please?" "Would you mind lowering your voice?" "Could you lower" versus "would you mind lowering?" This also applies to the phrases "keep it down" and "be quiet." Take a moment to practice the difference. Start with "keep it down." If we want to make it a question with "could you," how do we say it? Could you keep it down? Could you keep it down? Now, if you want to use the would you mind structure, how do we say it? Remember the difference with the verb. Remember the ing form. Would you mind keeping it down? Would you mind keeping it down? Same thing with be quiet. I'll give you the could you form and you try to make the would you mind form. Could you be quiet? How do we make this grammatically correct using would you mind? We would say, would you mind being quiet? The last formal phrase I have for you today is hold your tongue. Hold your tongue. So this phrase is interesting, I think. It's formal, but not very polite. It's the kind of sentence you might read in a fantasy book or hear in a historical movie. I can imagine a queen saying this. On the other hand, it could be used to be flirtatious, to flirt with someone. But, and I know I say this a lot, it depends on tone. So those are some ways you can formally and or politely ask someone to stop being so loud. But what if you don't want to ask? Or what if you don't want to do it politely? Let's take a look at what you can say if you want to command it. These phrases would be best for situations where you want to be rude. These expressions are very common between siblings, for example. The most popular way to command someone to be quiet is simply to say, shut up. Shut up. Now, this is usually pretty harsh. However, it can also be very playful if you're saying it in the right tone with friends. Shut up is also used to express surprise. If someone tells you they won $1 million, you can gasp, shut up. So it's a flexible phrase. In general, I would recommend using it playfully between friends because in other contexts, it will most likely signal anger. Another way to command someone to be quiet is to say, cut it out. Cut it out. In general, this phrase means to stop doing a particular behavior. In this case, it would mean the same as be quiet. This one can be used playfully between friends as well. Another command is not another word. Not another word. This is a very commanding phrase and is used mostly in situations where there is a big difference in power between the speaker and the listener. For example, between a parent and a child, or a commander and a soldier. It's not a phrase that would typically be said playfully between friends. Another very common command isn't even really a phrase, it's just a sound. Shh. The verb we use to describe this action is to shush. So to shush someone means to say shh to them. Many people think that shushing is very rude. I think it depends on the relationship between the person saying shh and the person they're saying it to. If it's between a parent and a child, it's not rude. If it's between a teacher and a student, it's not rude. If it's between strangers, I don't think it's that rude. If it's between friends, I don't know. It depends a lot on context and tone. Let's move on to more casual and informal ways to say be quiet. There are two words very similar to each other that are softer versions of quiet, and they are hush and shush. These are words that are commonly associated with babies, so they're softer. You can say hush please or shush please. You also have the option to turn them into phrasal verbs, hush up or shush up. Speaking of phrasal verbs, we also have pipe down. Pipe down. This one is less common in general, I think, but you can still hear it in movies and TV shows. Then there are two phrases that have a connection to clothes. Zip it and button it. I suppose this makes sense because both to zip and to button are about closing something. So to tell someone to zip it or button it, therefore means be quiet. These are informal phrases, but they have a more commanding vibe. So if you're talking to someone casually and you want to be emphatic, these would be good phrases to use. Honestly, these are phrases I use when my dog is being too loud. If he barks suddenly, I might say, "Hey, zip it." So those are a bunch of different ways to say be quiet. One more thing, and it's a big thing. Tone matters. In fact, I would say that tone matters most of all. All of the phrases in this episode can be rude, polite, mean, or playful depending on what tone you use. So think about your facial expressions. What is your face doing? Are you smiling when you say it? And think about the tone of your voice. That is the biggest part of being polite versus being rude, at least in American society. As always, you can find more information about this episode in the transcript. If you'd like an example of what a transcript from me is like, you can get the transcript of the very first episode of English Extras for free. Just follow the link in the description. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.